Hey there, welcome to Board Game Hot Takes, the podcast where we give our immediate reactions to the hottest board games just minutes after playing them. My name's Tim.
And this is Chris.
This is Adam.
And today we're going to give our hot take on the game we just finished playing, Dune, a game of conquest and diplomacy. But before we give our review of Dune, a game of conquest and diplomacy, I have some poll results to talk about, but they're not current poll results, they're future poll results.
What?
What? I can't wait to hear this.
Are we playing Anachrony? It's like podcast Anachrony? What's going on here?
That's right. So I also have some big news, and the news is that we are going to be changing the name of our podcast. So I'm going to give you a really quick story. If you haven't heard this story before, at least you understand. Basically, when we picked the name Board Game Hot Takes, it was just kind of a brainstorm right as we talked about making the podcast. We recorded our first test session and just use that because it's what we brainstormed. We really never put any thought into naming the podcast. And in all honesty, none of us really like the name that much. So we've just been doing it because we started that way, but we want to change it. And maybe it's a bad decision to change it because people aren't going to recognize us. But, you know, it's the old story. When is the time to change your strategy? 3 weeks ago was the right time. So yeah, the right time for us to change the name would have been before we recorded our first episode. Here we are. Let's go ahead and do it now so we don't have to wait in the future. The reason a poll comes into this, though, is that we do want to give our listeners a chance to give us a little bit of feedback. We've got a few names that we're tossing around that we're thinking about using. And so we're going to put a poll up on Twitter. It's going to run for a full week. So the day that this episode releases, it'll be available for you to vote on. You know, if it's a close one, we may just kind of fall back on what the hosts of the podcast want to use, but we're happy to hear, like, if one of the names that we're kind of leaning towards, you guys all hate it, then we're not going to go with it. So we're going to do a little market research here, get some input, but don't count on the poll being the final word here. We may settle on something that's a close second.
We may express our veto authority.
Exactly.
Yes. And to be clear, Bodie McBoatface is not an option.
Podcast McPodcast face, right? That's not going to happen.
So basically what's going to happen is that on 11/8, when this episode drops, I'm going to put a poll up on Twitter. You'll have 7 days to respond on it. It's going to have the 4 choices that we've kind of settled on here that we are leaning towards. Feel free to leave comments. Tell us why you do or don't like one of those names. If you don't like any of them, that's fine too. You can tell us that. It's probably not going to change our mind. We've brainstormed too many names. Nope, nothing's going to make everybody happy. But also, if you happen to listen to this after that poll has ended, you can feel free to just leave comments, drop us a note on any of our social media platforms, and tell us your choice as well, because we'll kind of keep those in consideration as well. The following week, not the week after 11/8, which would be 11. So 11/15, we'll kind of have a good idea what we're going to choose as the name, but we will probably not announce it until 11/22. Because that gives us a chance to kind of finalize everything. So that's upcoming. Feel free to give us some input if you'd like to. But we're going to be talking about this over several episodes to make sure that people that do listen occasionally know it's coming and they don't miss us once the name's changed. So we're going to be putting out a new name, new logo, new social media, our tags on social media. We'll try to make it really public, but just so you all know that that's coming. And one of the reasons, aside from just not loving the name, one of the reasons why we want to change it is that the words hot takes for some people mean controversial opinions, and that's just not really what we ever intended it to be. We just wanted it to kind of indicate that we're giving our reviews right after playing. So we've got some other names that are going to maybe represent that in a way that's not as much of a turnoff for some people. So here are the 4 names that we've kind of settled on as our choices, and these are going to be in the poll results. Number 1, Board Game Test Drive.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2, Board Game Snapshots. Number 3, Board Game Breakdown. Final, a little more generic, but maybe the right name, the Board Game Podcast. So those are the four options.
We just got a new soundboard for the show today.
So those are our 4 options for our upcoming renaming here. Hopefully you like one or more of them better than Board Game Hot Takes. I think we will once we settle in on it. But that's it. So you can watch for that coming up. All right, let's get into a description of Dune, a game of conquest and diplomacy. In Dune, a game of conquest and diplomacy, you play as one of 4 factions from Frank Herbert's classic sci-fi series Dune, vying for control of the planet of Dune and the most valuable resource in the galaxy which can only be found there, spice. The game is played over 3 to 5 turns that each consist of 7 phases. Most of the phases have to do with setting up the board and players' hands for that turn, but phase 5 is where the game really begins. Each player takes a turn playing up to 5 troops from the reserve to a region on the board, paying 1 spice per troop. Then they can move 1 group of troops on the map up to 3 regions away. Phase 6 is the battle phase. Any region that has more than 1 faction in it will have a battle during this phase. Battles occur between 2 factions at a time, and they will have a battle for each region they share with another player. Battle works like this. Each player will select a leader. Each faction has several leader tokens available to them with different numbers on them. And then they will choose how many troops they want to commit to battle, which can be any number up to the number of troops they have in that region of the board. Then they may commit a weapon and/or defense card. When both players have made these choices, they will be revealed. At the beginning of the game, each player selected 1 opposing leader in the game that they could use as a traitor. At this point, if the opposing player has selected the leader in this battle, then you can reveal your traitor card, and they will immediately lose this combat. If both players reveal their traitor card in the combat, then both players lose that combat, and if neither player reveals a traitor, then the battle continues. If a player has revealed a weapon that destroys the leader, you check to see if the opposing player has a defense that blocks that weapon. If they don't, then the opposing leader is destroyed. Then you add up the value of troops that were committed and the value of the remaining leaders, and the player with the highest number wins the battle. If there's a tie, it goes to the first player or the player that is closest in order to first player. All of the troops from the losing player and all of the committed troops from the winning player are destroyed. Battles will continue this way until there is no more than 1 faction in any one region of the board. In phase 7, each player with troops in a region that contains spice may collect 2 spice for every 1 troop in that region. Finally, in phase 8, you'll check to see if anyone has won the game. Starting on turn 3, if any one faction controls 3 of the 5 stronghold regions on the map, then they immediately win the game. If no players control 3 strongholds at the end of the 5th turn, then the game ends and players receive 5 points for each stronghold they control and 1 point for each spice they own. The player with the most points is the winner. It should be noted that each faction has unique powers that may break some of the rules that I mentioned, but this should give you a good idea on how the game plays. Dune, a game of conquest and diplomacy, was designed by Bill Eberly, Jack Kittredge, Peter Alatka, Greg Alatka, and Jack Retta, and is published by Gale Force 9. All right, so let's get into the gameplay and mechanisms of Dune, a game of conquest and diplomacy. The 3 of us have played this game exactly once tonight, about 5 minutes before we recorded. But Adam, you've played the original Dune game from like 1978, right? And I understand there's a lot of similarities here. How many times have you played that game?
So I've only played it a handful of times, maybe 5 or 6 times. And I think only maybe twice it's 6 players, which a lot of people say is the true way to play that original Dune game. And so that game, I talked about it in one of the previous podcasts, but there's all sorts of rules, ambiguities. Are you going to do a double spice blow? And if you are, then you're going to have to pay spice for your troops in combat, and that gives an advantage to a Fremen. Are you going to use the advanced cards? Are you going to use the non-advanced cards? There's just so many rules, ambiguities in that old game. It's great if you can all agree on the same set. If you use the same people over and over, then you can actually understand which rules you're going to play by and work within that system to try to have all this emerging gameplay and everything. But coming back to it and you have a new group of people playing with an old group of people, it can be all kinds of confusing. This guy's like saying, no, we use these rules back from 1982. And the other guy's like, oh, we use these rules from 2006. So it gets a little crazy. This game trims so much of that. And it was, it saves a lot of those original elements, and it's such a streamlined way to play it. So that was pretty nice. I won't get into too many of the mechanics right now. I'll save that for back to you, Tim. What did you think of it?
Yeah, so I want to talk about what I think is really the core of this game, and I didn't realize that until we actually started playing, but this game is all about conflict. It's all about combat. Every turn there's going to be 1 or more combats, and it's a big event. It's like revealing how many troops you're going to throw away, what leader you're going to have out there. You're going to be able to assassinate the leader. Do you have anything to protect your leader? Like, that's really what this game is all about, and I really liked it. I really liked that.
Wait a minute. What?
I know.
What?
Giving it a little bit away, but I was surprised because what this whole game is conflict. And if you go into it understanding that, the conflict is fun. It's got several fun decisions to make, but it doesn't bog it down too much. And there's a lot of interaction. There's a lot of things that can happen. And if you're just going in here to say like, hey, I just want to do this little bluffing combat game, that's what this game is. And it's pretty cool. So yeah, that's I think, you have to understand that going into it. That's what you're getting yourself into. You're going to be in conflict. You're going to be people are going to want to take stuff away from you. They're going to want to take your areas that you're controlling. They're going to want to take the spice that's out on the board. But that's the first thing I wanted to mention, because to me that was really the core of the game, which I didn't know when I read the rule book, but playing it, you just, you can count on that. Chris, any mechanisms that stood out to you here?
Clearly, the combat was the star of the show here. Like you said, that is 90% of the game. So I won't say more about that at this point. But a couple other things that I noticed in the game that I thought were kind of neat, one of which was the storms. And at the beginning of each turn, of each round, you roll the die and a storm moves. And the storm, it destroys the spice, it kills anybody who's in the way. And it continues to move every round. And I really like that kind of environmental condition that affects the gameplay. It reminds me a little bit of Windward. And I think this game,
Me too.
In Windward, for those who haven't played it or heard our discussion of that game, the wind changes every round, and you can fly free with the wind. You can't fly against the wind, and you pay a cost to fly sort of parallel to the wind. And there's a similar sort of dynamic here with the storm. It doesn't affect your movement as much, other than it prevents you from moving through the storm. But it's something that you have to kind of keep your eye on. Don't end your turn too close to the storm, because the next turn, it's probably going to land on you, and it's probably going to kill your army. So I thought that was kind of neat. It was at this sort of Deus Ex Machina kind of thing happening that you really had to be cognizant of, and takes out anybody in its way. I like that. I thought that was interesting. It was also very thematic.
I always thought that was pronounced Deus Ex Machina. Is it Deus?
It's
Ex
Deus.
Machina?
Deus Ex Machina,
Okay.
which is,
Nice.
for those not familiar, means ghost in the machine from the ancient Greek.
Well, I'm glad you actually mentioned Windward, Chris, in conjunction with that mechanism, because it also reminded me of that the map is laid out kind of the same way, and it's got this kind of like wind element or storm element. But oh my God, this is so much better, because one, you can kind of predict, there's some things that can happen, but you know which direction it's going to go. So you know what your odds are. It's not like Windward, where you can be in one space on the board and all of a sudden the dice aims a certain direction and you can't do anything. Like this, you're setting yourself up. You can protect yourself, or you can take the risk and say like, hey, I don't mind. I want to sit with this spice because it's worth the risk for me. And if you lose it, it's okay, because that's what this game is all about. It's about losing the stuff that's sitting out there available to you. And maybe you lose it this turn, take something from somebody else next turn. But it's just a normal turns trade-off when that storm comes in and gets in your way. But you can also use it to your advantage. You can move into one of those fortresses and then right in front of the storm and then hold it out. That way no one can take that fortress from you. So there's some kind of cool elements to that as well, some potential benefits.
So yeah, Tim, you're talking about that happened in this game. I had Carthag as one of the strongholds, and then the storm was parked right over Carthag. My troops, no one can go in or out of there unless they have some sort of special market card. But so yeah, that kind of secured that stronghold for me that round. I knew I had it safe, so I could go after two more. Didn't end up working out, but that's another way to use that storm. It's a super cool mechanic. Just to give some comparison to the old Dune, here I was the Fremen. In old Dune, Fremen get to see how far the storm's going to travel in old Dune. Here, it's just a dice. Whoever is the first player for that round just rolls I don't know how many sided die it is. Looks like 8. And then the storm moves that many pieces. And there's one side that has a little storm symbol, and then they get to move it up to them between 1 and 6 spaces instead of whatever the dice says. So that's kind of neat. And that's how they replace the old mechanic here in this game.
Yeah. So Adam, any other mechanisms that you wanted to call out?
The faction asymmetry was pretty interesting to me, again, in comparison to old Dune. Here, they're kind of wildly asymmetric, but not that difficult to understand. The Fremen can move all over the place. The Atreides still have the ability to say, hey, tell me what's going on with one of the aspects of your battle plan. The Harkonnen have all these traitors. There's no Bene Gesserit. Those are tied in with the Emperor, so they do have the voice. The Bene Gesserit and the Emperor are combined into one faction, so that's kind of neat how they use that too. Again, the Emperor gets all the freaking money, all the spice that people use to buy the market cards. So that's it's nice. It's like if you've played the old Dune, a lot of stuff is reminiscent, and this game will make tons of sense to you, and it's just nice and streamlined without wasting anybody's time. What do you guys think of the faction asymmetry here?
Yeah, so I can only speak to the Atreides faction, which is what I was tonight, and I loved it. Every time I went into combat, you guys had to make your battle plan, and then I got to decide what's the most impactful thing that I need to know that will help me make my battle plan. I didn't win any battles, I don't think, the entire night, maybe one. So it didn't help me that much, but it was fun to make you guys expose some information. Then I could change my plans around it. So I loved my faction's ability. Steve seemed awesome, where he was just taking our money. Like, he was basically going to default to win the game if one of us didn't get the area control, because he was taking our money. So that was really interesting. What about you, Chris?
I really enjoyed that. And I played House Harkonnen. And so I had the ability to draw a traitor card every turn or every battle that I entered into, and then discard one of the ones in my hand. So I could sort of tailor it around if I'm fighting somebody, and I can increase the possibility that I've got a traitor card for their faction. And I thought that was really interesting. I thought, the thing that I liked about the asymmetry was, like we said, the centerpiece of this game is the combat. And every single one of those asymmetrical abilities gave you some reason to really be concerned about going into battle with whoever it is you were planning to fight. And there's ways to avoid it, or fight try to strategize around their abilities. But you really had to think twice. There was nobody who was just neutral on battle, and I thought that was really interesting.
Though, did the Fremen have any combat abilities?
Not particularly. We had the strongest leaders, so they have like a 7 leader and a 6 leader. So I don't think they have any leaders that are 1s. I'm just looking quickly. I see a few 1s out there.
Okay, so the size of your leaders was the most impactful thing, but that's cool. That makes sense.
Right, or the toughest. Yeah.
And speaking of the traitor cards, that was a really fun mechanism too. Like, maybe it would never happen. It didn't happen for me, but I was hoping it was going to. Even in the first round, I went into combat with Steve, or maybe it was the second round. I went into combat with Steve, and unfortunately Chris came into conflict. But I had the traitor of Steve's strongest leader. I forget what the leader of the Bene Gesserits. The Reverend Mother, right?
Oh, yeah, yep.
So his 6, I had the traitor card for. So I was like, oh, I'm going to win this combat against Steve. And then Chris has to come in there and get in that conflict. So I was like, well, crap, I don't want to use my traitor card and knock out Steve and then just lose to Chris. So I decided to go to combat with Chris first. And he ends up beating me, so I didn't even get to use it. And I was just like, oh, I wanted to use it. But it's pretty cool. It's pretty fun to have that in your back pocket and the other people not knowing. Obviously, Chris had even more opportunities. But that was really fun, just having it there, knowing that you don't know what you're walking.
You almost want to go start fights with one guy, just to be like, maybe you're going to play that leader that I'll have their traitor card for, and I'll win the whole thing with this one guy. It'll be amazing.
Yeah.
Hey, let me ask you guys this. We have spent a lot of time recently talking about combat mechanisms. We talked about it in Scythe. We talked about it in Fractal. And we talked about it, and I can't even remember all the games we've talked about it recently, all the way from straight dice rolls to Voidfall, where it's completely determinative type of combat. Where did you guys think this fell in the pantheon of combat mechanisms?
I want to speak to this, okay? Because I think that this is a very luck-based combat. It doesn't seem like it should be, right? Like, it's got almost the same mechanism as Scythe. You take power that's visible, and you add one of your leaders, which everybody knows about, and that's the decision you make. In Scythe, it's very deterministic. You can almost always guarantee the outcome of a combat when you walk into Scythe, unless somebody bluffs you, right? Unless somebody says, I'm gonna pretend like I have got more power, I'm gonna spend more power. In this one, though, the weapon cards made such a big difference because your leader was usually the biggest power that you had, or could be. And so if somebody just had the right weapon and you didn't have the right defense for it, then that completely eliminated that thing. So it's like a roll of the dice, basically. So you could make some decisions about the information you had, but you really had no real knowledge of whether you're going to win that combat or lose the combat. Normally, I would not love that, but it added a really fun puzzle and a really fun element to each of these combats. And again, you have to go into this game understanding that this is a game about combat, and you're going to win some and you're going to lose some, and you can't feel bad about it. There's luck in the game. And so that was kind of my take on it, is that it's high on luck. It's not just the rolling dice. Of course, you're making some choices and you have some things you can do, which makes it fun, but you can't count on winning it no matter what cards you have. There could be a market card that somebody has that completely changes what is going to happen. Like Chris had a market card that eliminated somebody's faction ability. And so there's just no way that you know for sure, or they could happen to have the leader, the traitor card, that eliminates your leader. You just don't know for sure. You're just playing the odds, but it's a fun puzzle to do. And that's, I'm going to come to one more thing here. I know I've spoken for a long time here, but I think that's why this game is a game that I enjoyed, and I don't think I would like the original Dune, because it is full of luck and it's full of painful moments, losses, upsets. but it plays in an hour. And so it's like, okay, it's fine. It's just like, we're going to sit down for an hour and have this fun back and forth little thing that's going on. And if you're playing for 4 hours in the original, like what the original Dune was, with all these fiddly rules you got to track and everything like that, and then you get this random upset like that, to me, that's a lot more painful. So to me, this was okay, even though it was fairly heavy on the luck side. But luck with a fun, like, you got to make decisions about it. It wasn't like, I'm just going to roll the dice. It's like, I'm going to do this because I think he's going to have that. It's like this fun bluffing, like, try to read your opponent and what are they going to play and use all the, it was fun. To me, that was a really great decision point.
This is one of my favorite combat mechanisms that exist out there in gaming. They all give me a little bit different feel, but this one is awesome. Tim, I agree with you that early on, it's a little bit luck-based for sure. But as the game goes on, you can see which leaders are dead already and how many troops they have out there. And you might have a good sense of what combat cards have already been played, because you can, I don't know if the discard pile is open information, you can see what market cards have been played. So you can kind of surmise what might be out there. And if you're paying close attention, you can set yourself up to put yourself in strong positions to win a combat. But then you just, there's that element you just quite never know if somebody has a sneak attack card or something going on. Something crazy could happen. And that's what makes this combat so fun to me. And it's like you said, if you get wiped out in a combat, it's only 5 rounds. In the other game, you could get wiped out in the second round and you have to sit there in the newest old Dune, you just sit there for 8 more rounds. In the old Dune, I think it was like 15 rounds. You'd be sitting there for like 4 hours virtually eliminated, and it's just crushing. So I love this combat. And the Pantheon, I don't know, it's one of my favorites, Chris. I don't know how to rank it. Maybe we should do an episode on all the different types of combats out there. That'd be kind of cool.
That's a good one.
It's one of my favorites, though. How's this feel for you, Chris?
I agree with you guys completely. I think this one, I'm not sure if I would say that it's my favorite combat mechanism in a game, but it really hits a sweet spot. Tim, I think you hit the nail on the head, that it's the decision-making process that makes it a lot of fun. I mean, there's nothing worse than rolling a handful of dice and you come up with ones. I mean, that's just, nobody likes that. Nobody enjoys that. Nobody thinks that's fun. But this one, like you said, even if I play something that wasn't optimal, it's because I played it. Now I had to draw it, et cetera, and all that. But ultimately, I feel like I have a lot more agency in this kind of combat. And I thought that offset any sense of the luck involved in it. And I thought that made this a ton of fun when you're actually involved in combat.
All right. Any other mechanisms you guys want to touch on?
Yes. I want to touch on, it's one of the only resources in this game. It's the primary resource, the spice blow. How'd you guys like that? One of the first parts of the round, you flip this card over. It has 2 locations on the map where spice is going to pop up. And you need to go collect that spice. It's essentially the currency in the game that lets you do everything else. Fremen can get away with being pretty broke because they're natives on the planet and they can kind of move around fairly well without spice, but they need it too. So what do you guys think about that kind of hunt for spice and what it motivates for the rest of the game?
I should have hated it because of the way my game went. So here's how my game started. I'm playing the what's my faction name?
The Atreides, House of Atreides.
The Atreides, right? Like, yeah, the main guys. I was the good guys, and so I'm House Atreides. I start with 12 spice, which is the currency in the game. I spend 4 spice to buy 2 market cards in the first round, so I'm sitting at 8 spice. And then we go into the first deployment phase, and I spend 5 spice to put 5 troops out into this one combat. That was pretty confident. I felt pretty good about it. I felt good about being able to win that one against Adam, and it was for the only spice that was on the board. And so that leaves me with 3 spice on my player mat, 3 spice for the next round. So we go into that conflict, and I misplayed it. Like, I had a good hand going, but I didn't commit enough troops because I wanted to take all the spice that was out there. So I lost on the tiebreaker. I lost because Adam had, whatever. He had the
battle priority,
first player advantage. Yeah, for being first player. So I lost on the tiebreaker, and that basically wiped me out. I was stuck at 3 spice. That means the next round I get, so I could basically just deploy 3 troops on the next round. I couldn't buy any market cards. It should have completely shut me down. I still loved it. It's tight, but it's so critical. It's so important, except for the Empire, which has, everyone's feeding them money. They've got plenty of cash available. So it's like a different resource for them. But it was cool. It was cool. It drove conflict. Like, you had to go in and get that spice. It was what you had to do. So aside from the win conditions, which is those fortresses, it drove you to have to pick up that spice because it's the only way you were going to do other stuff in the rest of the game. And that's I mentioned that. Like, that's what this game's all about. It's about conflict. So if you want conflict, you got to make something worth going after. And they did a great job with using that as the tool to force people to go after each other. And it's so important. If you don't win it, then your next round's going to be a little rough. So that was cool.
Chris, any thoughts there?
I did not care for it. I thought that, honestly, here, I feel like I'm stepping into Tim's shoes here. When you've got one resource that lets you do everything in this game and it pops up completely randomly, I mean, that's kind of a bummer because it can land near you, it can land on you, and that's great. Or it can be nowhere near you and you have to, deploy forces.
Distance really rarely mattered though, right? Because almost every round, at least for me, maybe because all my guys got wiped out at the beginning, almost every round I was just deploying to what I wanted to go for that round. Like, it didn't matter if I had other troops on the board for the most part.
Yeah, no, that's fair. But I guess then my complaint would be, well, then why bother with the randomness at all? I mean, why not just have this be, I don't even know what, but it seemed very arbitrary, and it was such a critical thing to everything you wanted to do. You couldn't buy cards. You couldn't get powers. You couldn't put out troops. You couldn't buy back your leaders. I mean, all those things you need the spice for. The spice seems so arbitrary to me.
Chris, yesterday was Halloween. You don't need to dress as me today for this podcast. No, I'm kidding. I totally get that. I could completely understand those feelings. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the tightness of that market of spice and how hard it was to get to and how it all worked together. But I completely understand that.
What about you, Adam?
Yeah, to address your complaint, Chris, it seems kind of arbitrary. Maybe it does, but it gives you something to go for. The decision is, am I going to, I have 5 troops on this side of the map. Am I going to ship 5 troops to this other side of the map to go for this spice? Or am I going to, maybe I'll just hold up and go for this stronghold over here. So it gives you kind of choices to go for. And then, you can always go in the polar sink. And here in this edition of Dune, they've given you movement of 3, whereas lots of factions in the old Dune only had a movement of 1. So talk about having a tough time getting a spice in the old Dune. It was near impossible if you weren't in a good position. Here with that 3 movement, you could ship you could have dudes just hanging out in the polar sink and basically get anywhere on the board with a movement of 3. So I thought that was kind of neat. And then the decision becomes, do I want to split up my troops? Do I want to kind of keep them together so they can be a little bit stronger in combat? I really like how the spice mechanism works here. It's a lot easier to get to than in the old Dune. So I enjoyed it.
And I'll say, too, that the randomness of it was kind of interesting because that storm is moving around. So where the spice randomly got dropped, it could mean that there was less spice in that round. Like in our first round, one of the drops was completely eliminated because it was where the storm was. So we got less spice available to fight over. And then in future rounds, the storm could come over and just take spice away, take it off the board. And then there's some that didn't come up in our game, which I know is a mechanism, but when you're turning over the spice reveal, there are the sandworms in there. So if one of those gets revealed, it actually takes out all the troops and I think the spice too, right? Or maybe it's just the troops on a space where
no, it takes out the troops and the spice unless it's the Fremen. Then the Fremen are fine with the worm because they're buddies with the worms.
They ride them away though, right? So
they can ride them if they want to, yeah.
So there's some definitely thematic reasons for having the spice randomly generated out there. And mechanically, I thought it worked. So again, I totally understand the frustration. I'm surprised I didn't hate it, but I actually thought it was fine. I thought it was fine. Sure.
In reality, I think that my complaint with the spice is tied in with some of the complaints I have about this game overall, but I'll hold that until final thoughts because that's kind of a broader view.
All right, cool.
One other thing I want to talk about here is the market cards in Old Dune. The first phase of that, or maybe after the storm, was you'd auction off these cards, and that would add so much time to the game. Here, if you have spice, if you want to buy a market card, you just do it and you pay the Emperor. So I thought that was a nice cleanup of that to really reduce the time. That was really nice. What do you guys think of the market cards?
I mean, listen, you're spending 2 spice for something you don't know what you're getting, and it could be fairly useless. I thought, to be honest, that one of the cards I drew early in the game was completely useless for me, and then I used it on the last round. It almost set me up for the possibility of winning the game, which I wouldn't have had the chance to before. But the reality is that it's going to be frustrating sometimes. You're going to pay 2 spice and get a card that is not valuable for you or useful for you at all. But that goes to all of the things that I would have a concern about with this game if this was a 2 or 3 or 4 hour game. And that this is a 1 hour game. You're going to get it knocked out. It's a bunch of fun, raucous, like, hey, let's go to combat. What do you do? Oh, you revealed this thing. You know, like, it's just a quick, fun, streamlined game full of conflict and combat that's thematic. And so I think that's why the market cards work in this situation. If you were playing a 4-hour version of Dune and you just randomly got a draw after paying for it, that could be pretty frustrating. All right, cool. Well, let's talk about the theme and the production of Dune, whatever the long name is here. I'm going to stop trying to say that. We'll just call it Dune from now on. So we played on Tabletop Simulator tonight. Do you guys have any thoughts about the production of this game?
I'll let you take this one, Adam, and I'm particularly interested in hearing what you think about it compared to the old version.
So yeah, the production here is very similar to the old version. The map is nearly identical. A few changes in the terrain and moving around. The phases are lined up. It's nothing spectacular. A bunch of cardboard shits, a bunch of circles, spices tiny. Your troops are tiny little circles. You know, you got them all stacked up. That's kind of how you do it. You move them around. So you're looking at the size of stacks and trying to count them up. So moving around these small little chits can get to be a little bit tedious. But you know what? I don't care. Like, I still like the way the map looks. I like all the crazy names. I like the rock versus the sand versus the strongholds. That all looks great to me. And then all the images here are like screen captures or images from the new movie, which has just such a nice feel to it. So I really enjoyed looking at the art here. I'm interested to hear what Chris is going to say, but maybe we'll save Chris for last. Tim, what'd you think of the production here?
I think it's fine. I think it's very serviceable, and I can understand why they made those chits that are stackable, because you got some pretty small regions on the board here where you're trying to fit a stack of spice, and you got to fit troops of who knows an indeterminable amount of count. So stacking really makes sense, because when you were first talking about that, I was like, oh, even Dune Imperium, I would have rather they had wooden cubes, but then you can only fit so many wooden cubes, right? So unless you just completely changed the way the board was laid out and made it less, kind of like dynamic, as far as there's some small regions and some big regions and things like that. And then, there's regions that get cut off by the storm. So you only have a small segment of that region available. So it's important that I think they went with a functional route here, which isn't very pretty. And sometimes it's a pain in the butt because you have to count that whole stack of chips, but it's probably the best way to go here. So I can't complain about that. Otherwise, I thought it was totally fine. I'm guessing I don't know what the MSRP on this game is. I'm guessing it's not an expensive game. $40, something
pre-order
like that.
right now about $40. Yep.
Yeah. So I think for a $40 game, I think that the production is solid. I like the way the map looked. It did remind me of the old Dune game, which I've seen pictures of before and always looked kind of fun to me. The cards themselves, which is where all the art is just using movie screen captures, and that's fine. I kind of prefer what Dune Imperium did by doing original art that was made off of that. I like that better. I think it's fine though. What about you, Chris?
I'm amazed that after the discussion we just had on The Expanse that you guys are being so kind to this game, honestly.
Dude, this is so much better than The Expanse.
Why?
It is like a cardboard.
It's a bunch of cardboard chits for troops, which is exactly what The Expanse has, and a bunch of cards that have screen capture art from a movie, which is exactly what The Expanse has. And the one thing that I will say stood out in this game to me compared to The Expanse, for example, was the map. And the map was nice. I'll give you that. The map was decent. I like that it's got the Adam talked about the different types of terrain. I thought it looked good. I thought it was functional. I thought it felt organic, and I really enjoyed that. But beyond that, I mean, there was nothing about this that was exciting at all. But having said that, I think the same thing we said about Expanse is also true in terms of gameplay. That I don't think it hurt the gameplay that much. It wasn't much fun to look at, but I don't think it hurt the game. But Tim, so you so badly want to say something right now. He's just like leaning into the mic and ready to say something.
Why this is better than The Expanse. And again, it's not an amazing production. I think it's fine. But so starting with the map. The map is not like a bad GIF taken off the internet of space, right? Like right there, we're 1,000 times better. Number two, in The Expanse, the troops, which are ships in that one, are little cardboard chits with like a outline of a ship drawn on it. It's not detailed in any way. This is the faction symbols. So it's supposed to represent influence in that region, not necessarily troops, from what I understand. Maybe it is supposed to represent troops, but you know, it's like it's showing the faction. It's easy to read. It's easy to understand whose is what, and it doesn't look like a hand drawn like outline of a ship. So improvement, even if it's not amazing. And the card art, although it is movie art, first of all, it is the new production of the Dune movie, which looks beautiful. So every single screenshot in that movie looks amazing. And they actually used it with proper lighting on the cards here compared to The Expanse, where for some reason they darkened up every image that was used on those cards.
Excess of black ink for that printing of The Expanse.
Yeah, so
In space,
I mean,
no one
totally,
can see you scream.
I get what you're saying, Chris, here, but they aren't. When you actually look at the two of them next side by side, they're not comparable. This is drastically better, but it is pretty generic, and I understand that. It definitely didn't insult me as much as The Expanse did, but it also didn't wow me. So that's fair criticism.
I kind of like
Everything you just said is wrong.
I'll say at least they're consistent. Everything is like little tiny circles, right? Except the leaders are like slightly bigger circles. So if you get used to little tiny circles all over a map, I think it's a good time. You get circles to mark the rounds and circles to mark the phases and the troops and the leaders and the spice. And so if you're down with that, then it's kind of retro. It reminds me of like old, 1980s games with all these chits. Kingmaker is what I'm thinking of. So
that's not a positive at all. You're talking me down now on the production.
I quite enjoy it, and both of you guys are wrong about this one. This game's rad.
All right. Well, what about the theme? What do you think of the thematic tie-ins? Because I actually have some things to say here, but I don't know. Maybe you guys will talk me out of it because I might spoil something with the movie. But how did the theme of this game feel with the story of Dune?
Well, since Chris doesn't know the story of Dune, I guess I'll talk to it. I thought it fit in perfectly. I love that the Fremen have all these advantages being natives to the planet. They can move easily. The storm doesn't slice them up like it slices up the other factions. The Harkonnen with all these traitor cards, and they're making all these plans and sneaking around. The Atreides with this prescience, being able to predict the battle plan, and similarly for the voice with the Imperium faction. And then, of course, they got all the money. It just ties in perfectly. And if nobody does anything to stop the Imperium, they're going to have all this money by the end of the game. So they're kind of like the new default winners of the game, like you brought up, Tim. So it's just cool, man. It's everything thematically fits in amazingly well. And this is a trimmed down thematic tie-in to the old Dune, which went to extra levels to have thematic tie-in. Tim, what do you think about it? If someone else who's actually seen the movie.
Thank the maker for trimmed down thematic tie-ins, because adding extra rules overhead just for theme is never the right decision. So I think it was great. I mean, listen, I just saw the new movie. I saw the old movie years ago, so maybe I know the whole story of the first book, but I don't remember most of it. And the new movie is only like part one of part two, right? So if I understand right, we only got like half the story from watching the new movie. So I don't fully know the movie. There was one battle in that movie. So does this feel like a thematic tie into the movie? Not really, because this is all battles. It's like constant. Well, in that movie, it was one battle. But the one thing I wanted to say about the theme here is more like a complete baffling question about the original story. Maybe I'll save that. Maybe Adam and I can talk offline and he can try to explain this to me, because I'll spoil the movie for somebody listening to it. So, and Chris doesn't want me to spoil it either. So I'll save my baffled question about why things happen the way they did in the movie, unrelated to the game. I think it's great. It felt like, you're right, the factions tie in great. The world tied in great. The things that are happening in the world tied in great. So I think without overcomplicating the mechanisms to try to tie into the theme, I thought it did a great job.
I will say there are some. So the old Dune has an alliance mechanism where it makes sense for certain factions to become alliances with each other, whereas in this game you don't have that, and there are some like conflicts that result that you might not see in the movies.
I have not seen the movie, and I saw the old movie back in the 80s, which rocks. Kyle MacLachlan and that weird fat guy with the blisters on his face. That was disgusting. But I haven't seen the new movie. I haven't read the books, but I know enough about the story to know that they did a really nice job with the thematic tie-ins. The storm that we talked about before is a perfect example of that. It fits perfectly with the story. It makes perfect sense. And I thought those pieces of it seemed really good. And maybe I think even more so if I saw the movie, but even without seeing that, I could appreciate it.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well, I wanted to touch on that since it's on an IP-based game, and I think it works pretty well. All right, well, let's jump into favorite moments of the game. Chris, any moment that, or well, let me rephrase that. Memorable moments. I gotta say it's memorable moments because it's never favorite moments for Chris. So, Chris, what moment really pissed you off in this particular game?
I'm not that transparent. No, this hands down. This is an easy one here, and I bet Adam is thinking about the same moment. The first round, when he could have actually won the game by area control, he controlled all the areas that he needed to. And I went on this suicide mission to try to take him out because I didn't want him to win in the third round. And so we went into this epic battle, whipping out all these cards. We both had our big leaders left to play, and we busted them out. And you know how in this game you kind of take your pieces back and you shuffle them around, you put together your fight board, your battle plan, and then you drop it like a bomb on somebody. And we did that. And the minute he did, I was like, "Traitor! I killed you. I won because I got the traitor for your leader." And he looks at mine and he goes, "I got your leader too." And so we had this epic battle that resulted in the two of us, like both of us, getting completely wiped off the map, at least on that spot. And I mean, it sucked because I was hoping to win the battle, but it was epic. It was exciting and epic, and I'd so much rather lose the battle by going out in a blaze of glory like that. And I enjoyed that. That was a lot of fun.
Did that happen? Was that in the end of the third round, right? When
It was.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, see, because the game would have been over right at that point.
Yeah, it would have been over. Chris saved the game. It kept it going on.
I remember that event happening. I just didn't realize it was right at that point. I thought it happened later in the game. It was so huge. I thought it was like a big end game, apex or whatever.
Chris, I want to ask if you had any of my other characters that were traitors, because I could have used my strongest guy in that fight, and I intentionally used like a second or third strongest guy, thinking that you would maybe not have kept the second or third strongest guy.
Well, the funny thing is that I had exactly one of your guys. It's a shame that I didn't go into combat more with Tim, because I had like every one of his characters. I could have like wiped him out on every battle, and I never went into battle with him. So except for one time at the beginning. But so Adam, what do you think? I'm curious to hear if that's maybe your moment was different, but that was my moment.
No, absolutely, that was the same moment of the game, and I was like, "What's going to happen?" He's got my traitor card. I have his traitor card. I had Baron Harkonnen, his big number 6 guy. So I was like, what do we do? It turns out everybody just kills everybody. All the cards get discarded. Leaders are dead. Troops are dead. Everyone just goes away in a double traitor situation, which I'd never seen before. So that was pretty fun. Another moment for me, Steve is not here, but similar situation. He needed to secure the victory for himself. I had a chance to win. I think that was at the end of the 5th round. We're doing our combat phase. And he drops the old laser gun shield combination and blows up everything in the battle. The old suicide bomb kills everything. And he was fine with that because he had like 1 billion spice sitting over there, which is the new win condition. Most spice at the end of the 5th round if nobody has control of 3 of the strongholds. So that was a pretty cool moment to see the classic laser gun shield combo in person. That was pretty fun. What about you, Tim?
That does make me interested. I bet that the end game tiebreaker would be a lot more interesting if you were playing a 3-player game without the Empire involved, because it was so easy for them to get spice. So that could, in a 3-player game, it could actually be pretty interesting because you'd have to be like holding back some spice just to make sure you had enough and not spend it all to win those final battles. So it could be pretty game changing. So there was a lot of ups and downs for me in this game, but every time there was a down, I just had to tell myself, sometimes after cursing at my co-host here, that this is going to be a short game and it's quick and it's okay. It's all about the combat. It's okay that I just lost that epic battle because there's going to be another one next round. So, it's fine. But the one thing that really stood out to me is I really did think at the beginning of the game, like I threw everything away, lost my first battle, and I was really struggling the rest of the game. Like I'm at 3 spice, go into the next round, get into a battle with 2 people, lose it. So next round I start at 3 spice. Like I just didn't have anything to do. But I got into the final round and I had that card that let me move 2 sets of troops instead of just 1. And so I was actually able to spread out into 3 different fortresses, which put me in the win condition position. And I could have potentially, with the right combination of weapons, I had weapons. I could take Adam out in both combats if I got lucky and he didn't have the right defenses. And then I was in a combat with Steve, but Steve had a massive amount of troops. But my 1 trader card was his biggest, leader, his biggest leader card. So I was like, this is fine. If I can win these combats with Adam, then I'll come over here. Steve will drop his leader card, and I'll surprise him with the trader and wipe it all out. So I was just so excited that I got the opportunity to actually go into that final round and still maybe pull off a win. And then I realized that Steve's leader that I had the trader card for was already already used it another round. It was already dead. So it wasn't going to happen for me. But it was still fun to at least think there was a shot at it, and I could have pulled that off with a little bit better planning.
Do you guys? My heart gets pumping when I go into battle with somebody that I have their trader card. I'm like, come on, like you better play this stinking leader so I can bust this card. It's so freaking such a good feeling. So I just want to see. Did you guys get that sense at all from this game?
Chris probably knows better than I did because I never had the chance to. Because like the one battle I went in with Steve early, Chris took me out before I could fight him, and then I never got a chance to. His was already dead by the time I got a chance to do it. But what about you, Chris?
It didn't feel that exotic to me because I had so many trader cards in my hand. I think at the beginning I started with 4, and then I was able to switch one out at the beginning of every battle. So, ironically, the only time I actually got to play one of my trader cards was when I was fighting Adam in the battle I just talked about. Other than that, I never had a chance to use them.
All right, well, let's talk about the final question of this game, and would you request to play it again? Adam, what about you?
Absolutely. Like for about an hour game, troops on a map, battling around, like doing crazy stuff, crazy moves, some high highs and some low lows. This game is incredible. It gives me everything I want. And like you've said over and over, Tim, like if you get knocked out, you're going to be either back up in a couple rounds or the game's going to be over before you have a chance to be sore about it for too long. So yes, I would absolutely request to play this game again. What about you, Tim? You got a response to that?
Yeah, no response other than just to say that listen, this is not my type of game. And so there's almost never a time where I'm going to request to play a game that's conflict heavy, troops on a map. But if I was going to play one, or if somebody said, hey, pick one of these several, this is one of my top ones that I've played. I really think it's clever. It's streamlined. If you go into it with the idea that you're just going to be fighting with people and that's the only strategy, you got to go in there and fight with people and have fun with it, then I'm good with it. And there's 2 other games that I've also enjoyed a lot for the same reason. Number 1, we talked about it last week or last couple of weeks, and that was the Expanse, not Eclipse, the Expanse, because it's streamlined, it's easy gameplay and decisions, it's easy to teach, it's just quick. And so like even if things don't go your way, it's over quickly and you had a fun little experience with it. And then the other game, which has really always been my top area control game, and that's Blood Rage. And Blood Rage is a very different game. It doesn't feel the same. It's obviously got a much bigger production. It's got some different decision points. But the thing that I always liked about Blood Rage is that it's quick. It's an hour. The decisions are quick. Turns are quick. And so this kind of in the same way made me have a fun time, even if it wasn't my type of game. So I probably won't request to play it if there's a stack of Euros next to it that I would rather play. But if it was like, hey, do you want to play this or do you want to play Kemet or Eclipse, I'll pick this every time. And that just reminds me why, even though I like the mechanisms in Kemet, like thinking through this game and the Expanse, why I like Blood Rage still so much out of all these area control games is because it is just it goes really quickly, and this did the same thing for me. So I had a fun time with it. I'd be happy to play it anytime you guys wanted to play it. What about you, Chris?
I would not ask to play this one again. I thought the combat was great. And the combat is the only thing in this game. I mean, we talk frequently about how many paths to victory do you have in a game. Well, there is exactly one path to victory in this game. Yeah. It is fighting people, fighting people, fighting people. You made a good comparison to Blood Rage, Tim, and I would take Blood Rage over this game any day because the combat is very interesting and the number of different types of units that you can deploy that have different powers and different abilities makes a huge difference. Here, there's a little bit of that because you have your leaders and there's the defenses and what have you, but it didn't feel that strategic to me. A lot of it, like you said, was luck. And ultimately, the game just felt to me to be a little bit thin. It was basically turn starts, throw a bunch of guys on the map in a place that's going to be beneficial to you, fight the people there, hopefully you win a battle, hopefully you get some spice. Next turn, put out as many guys as your spice will allow you to do in a space that you want to get the spice from or you want to take over a stronghold, and you do the same thing over again. You're doing that for like 4 rounds in a row, and at the end of that, there's a winner. And I just didn't find it that compelling. I didn't think there was enough strategy there in the battle to make it as exciting as a game like Blood Rage. I did have fun with it. I did enjoy the game, but I feel like this is one where if I played this 2 or 3 or 4 times, I just get kind of bored of it, honestly.
All right. Well, Chris is Debbie Downer today.
I know. Jeez, Chris.
I'm kidding.
I hate these area control games.
I thought I could count on. I kind of count on old reliable Chris to come through with his area control guys, troops on the map. But I'm trying to make some stupid reference about the sands of time are shifting
The sands
on
of
Dune. Yeah.
Fair enough, Chris. All right. Well, that will wrap up our review of Dune, a game of conquest and diplomacy.
And excitement and combat and fun and thrill.
and cardboard tokens. And we'll talk about some games that have been on our table, as well as some future takes right after this. All right, welcome back. So we're going to talk about some games we've been playing lately. And why don't I start here? So the game that I want to talk about is designed by Shem Phillips and published by Garphill Games. And that's Paladins of the West Kingdom. Now, I have really been intrigued by Shem Phillips' designs for years, almost since I got into the hobby. And for some reason, I just haven't gotten around to playing or purchasing most of them. I think in a lot of ways because I think they seem like they're taking a lot of familiar mechanisms and reusing them. So even though I like the art that's been in them, I like what it seems to be doing, I haven't been driven to actually purchase one. So I was given Paladins of the West Kingdom as a birthday gift and busted it out to learn it and play some solo games. And holy cow, do I love this game. This game is so cool. Adam, I don't think this is your game at all, right? This is a parallel play game. I love that term that you've been bringing into our conversations lately. This is a game that I like because I can set up my strategy and do my thing, but that is what you're doing here. Basically, the way the game works is that it is a worker placement game, but all the worker placement, most of it anyway, is on your own player board. And so every player has a large player board that has basically 6 main actions you can take and like 4 additional actions you can take on your own player board. But what's kind of interesting is that each action or most of the actions take more than one worker, and they're workers of different types. So you have to kind of, have the right workers to go and take specific actions on this board. What's really unique about it though is that each of these actions that you're taking, they don't only require the workers, but they also have kind of thresholds that change throughout the game. Let me give you an example. On the left-hand side of the board, there's a little track from 0 to 12, and you have 3 different colored markers on it. Black, which I think represents faith, red, which is like power, and then blue, which is honor, or something like that. But basically, there are kind of 3 stats that you're trying to raise for your part of this kingdom. So if I want to go and take the commission action, for example, which is to send a monk out, essentially kind of set up a monastery out in the foreign lands and protect our outsiders from coming in, I would have to spend a green worker, a generic worker, and a black worker, and then take one of the monks off my board, which uncovers one of the blue flags, which is like the honor flag. So that would move up the blue flag on my board. But then I'd have to go put it out on a place on a central board that covers up a bonus that everyone would have access to if it's not covered. bonuses are only available to me based on the faith that I've got on my board. So every one of these actions that you're taking, they basically unlock a new benefit, move up one of your traits, but they require another trait to be at a certain level before you can take advantage of it at a certain level. So it's kind of this push and pull of, I'm trying to undo this thing, but I can't just focus on this thing because first I have to get this other thing done. It's a nice combination. I mentioned it on Twitter. It reminds me a little bit of Gaia Project, because you have several tracks on your player board that as you take one of these actions, you uncover something, and then it opens up more benefits. But there's also a fun part that some of the things you uncover, you then take the piece you uncovered and you put it out onto a central board, and you immediately get a bonus from it. Or if you uncover a thing on your board, you get a bonus from it. Or if you there's these outsider cards that are on the board, and you can either attack them or you can convert them. Those are two different actions. And the attack benefit is one thing, the convert benefit is a different thing, and those vary all the time. You can also recruit people into your city, which is kind of a little bit of an engine building. So there are these citizen cards that are in like a kind of a row on top of the board that shifts every round. And so you can basically recruit them to put them into your city as an ongoing effect, or you can take the simpler recruit action, which only costs one worker, and then you just get an immediate benefit from it. So it's this little combination of just taking all these different worker actions, playing with your own board, trying to raise the right stats, beat other players to the benefits that are on the board, take the right cards that fit with your strategy, which are going to give you new scoring opportunities. There's a decent amount going on with the game, but it just is the right amount of puzzly. It's not punishing like Gaia Project, so it's not like Gaia Project where like, hey, I take, upgrade my ore mine into a whatever it is, a trading factory, but now I'm going to produce less ore next time. So it doesn't have that negative. It's all positive. Everything you do is going to give you some kind of benefit, but it's also going to depend on something else you did on a previous round. So it's a really fun puzzle. A couple more things I'll mention is that in the central board, the things that you do interaction with is, like I said, you're racing to some of the bonuses. Go ahead, Adam.
Timmy, this is Paladins or Architects?
This is Paladins.
Paladins,
of the West Kingdom. Yeah. So some of the things you're going to do is you're going to be racing to some of the bonuses by either placing garrisons out on the board, which you have to have a certain amount of power to do that to get to specific bonuses. But you're basically going to be racing the other players to these bonuses. Or you can commission, so you can send monks out to those same spaces, but they have two different thresholds you have to get to. You can also, to interact with other players, there are 3 common scoring goals. The first one's going to be visible in the first round, but then the other 2 are going to turn up over the next 2 rounds. So, that's something that's available for everybody. And then after the third round, the third through the 7th round, there's going to be central worker placement spaces that are a little bit stronger that are going to show up. The other interesting thing here, though, is that there's one type of worker, which is I don't remember what they're called, but they're the purple workers. They're basically supposed to be like suspicious characters. So if you get a purple worker, they're a wild. They can be used for any space on the board. But every time you take a purple worker, you also have to take a suspicion card. And the suspicion card has either between 0, 1, or 2 coins that are going to be given to you from this central bank every turn. So you might both get a wild worker as well as some coins. But once the coins are gone out of that central bank, then a inquisition happens, and whoever has the most suspicion cards gets a negative benefit. They basically get a debt card. And then there are some ways to basically pay off those debts later in the game, but you don't want to be the one with the most suspicion generally in the game. So there's a little bit of push and pull, and like, I can get that thing, it's a good benefit for me, but it's going to put me at risk for something else. And that's something that's competing with the rest of the players on the board. And then the other cards that you're kind of bidding on, aside from the outsiders that you can attack or convert, you also have the kind of the townsfolk that you can recruit and take advantage of those. And those only refresh at the end of the round. So you're kind of racing to those to the best benefits every round and what's going to work for your strategy. So there's a fair amount of things that you care about what other people are taking, but that's generally where the interaction comes from. This is fairly heavy Euro with a lot of focus on doing my own puzzle and trying to do it better than everybody else. And wow, I love it. It's so clever. Everything just ties together really in a really fun way. So it's got me really excited. I've been having a great time with it. The solo game is really smooth to run, but feels like you're playing against a real opponent.
Have you been playing this one mostly at 1 or 2 or 3?
Oh, I've only played it solo so far. So only played it solo. I think I've got a really good grasp on how it would feel at 2 players or 3 players. Like, it's not going to change much from the solo game because they did a great job with the solo mode on this. I'd love to play it with 2, 3, or 4 players. I think the actions are fairly quickly. Like, it's not going to slow things down. It's a fairly quick turn, I think, for most people. I mean, I think it played great at higher player counts, but it's going to be pretty much multiplayer solitaire here.
Another question for you. Have you played any other Shim Phillips other games like Architects or Viscounts or any of the North Sea games?
I played Raiders of the North Sea. I have that game, and I think it's a very fun game. Chris, you played that with me one time, I think. It's been a while though, several years
just
ago.
once.
I think Raiders is a really fun twist on fairly simple worker placement. There's some things I don't love about that game, mostly that there's just too much going on the board. Like, you just have these bits and pieces everywhere, so it's just cluttery. It's a mess to kind of look at and interact with. It's very streamlined, and it's a fun game. Like, that's one that's right on the fringe for me. Like, I'm almost about to push out of my collection because I just am not driven to go back to it, but in some things I really like about it. So I like that one. This one I love, though. This one is probably my favorite. I did play one other Garphill game, which was Hadrian's Wall, which actually feels a lot like this in a roll and write, in a very, very heavy roll and write type of format, where instead of interacting with all these things, resources and cards, you're actually just interacting with these two huge sheets that you're checking stuff off and getting the bonuses. But it does have some other similar feelings to it, other than the fact that it's a roll and write.
Now, maybe you didn't know this, or maybe you don't, but is there any kind of evolution from like the North Sea games to the West Kingdom games? Are they all kind of iterations, or are they totally separate?
They're very different mechanisms, and I didn't play the other two North Sea games, but they weren't worker placement games from what I could tell. So I think in the original trilogy, the North Sea trilogy, he kind of took three different mechanisms and told this overarching story about kind of Norse mythology. And that's, I think, fairly similar, you could say, in the West Kingdoms trilogy, where Architects of the West Kingdom is a more traditional worker placement game. A game I really want to play, but I do worry that it's a little too close to traditional worker placement that I've done over and over again. This one doesn't really feel like a worker placement. This feels more like Orleans, which, if you guys have played it, that's a bag building game where you are taking workers and then putting them on action spaces on your own board. That's how you take your actions. So this is very similar in that way, but the way you get the workers, and to me, the actions are more fun in this game, and the way you get the workers is a little bit different. There's a little bit of a kind of a draft at the beginning of the round for which workers you're going to have access to, and then you take 3 cards off this pile of your own every turn. You look at 3 of them, you pick one you're going to use that turn, which is going to give you some threshold bonuses, some workers, and some other bonus. And then you put one of them on top of your deck and one at the bottom of the deck. So you have a couple really fun decisions about which workers you're going to be able to play with that turn. And then the rest of the round is like taking turns, placing those workers and getting different benefits for them. Man, this is my type of game. Viscounts of the West Kingdom is the third in the trilogy, in the West Kingdom trilogy, which I'm really intrigued by. That one looks very unique. It's got a very minor deck building element. Other than that, it doesn't look like anything else I've ever played before. And some of the feedback I've gotten, at least from other solo players, is that is as good or better than Paladins. So I'm really excited about that now that I've had a chance to play Paladins. This game doesn't do things that have never been done before, but it does a bunch of things in a really great tight package that I love. It comes in a box that's like 8 inches by 8 inches, and it's just packed with everything you would need. Like, it feels like this big, heavy box of components, and it's packed in this tiny little box. And there's something about that I'm just loving lately. I'm loving when you can just get this little tiny box with a huge game in it.
That's refreshing.
And,
yeah.
How is the production, though?
It's great. I mean, like, if you haven't looked at any of Garphill games, most of the art that they've done, at least on this North Seas trilogy and the West Kingdoms trilogy, has all been done by this one artist, the Miko. And it's kind of this like slightly cartoony, abstracted art. I really like the style. It's a very unique art style to it. And he's done other board game art as well, but I really like what they did here. So it always draws me in. It's colorful. The iconography, Shem Phillips' iconography that he uses, it's similar across all the games, and it works really well to me. It's very readable. So it's mostly just like these nice thick player boards and essential boards, some decent quality cards, and a bunch of wooden components. That's mostly what you can expect from any of their games, but I always like them, even if they're not extravagant or really unique.
Cool.
All right, so that was Paladins of the West Kingdom. Chris, you got something for us you've had on your table this week?
I do. I want to talk tonight about My Little Scythe. and the Pie in the Sky expansion, published by Stonemaier Games. This game, we don't talk a lot about family weight games on our show, and so I wanted to take this opportunity to talk about one that I think is pretty exceptional. So My Little Scythe is designed by Hobie Chu and his daughter Vienna, and I love the story behind this game. Apparently, Hobie loved playing Scythe, the base game by Stonemaier also, which we've played many times and I know is very, very popular. And he wanted some way to share that experience with his daughter, who is very young, but in an age-appropriate way. And the result of that was My Little Scythe. So for the record, Stonemaier Games provided me with a review copy of the Pie in the Sky expansion, which I'm going to talk about. But I already owned and really enjoyed the original My Little Scythe base game, so I was particularly interested in trying this expansion. So let's talk a little bit about the game. Unlike Scythe, this game is not set in a dystopian alternate 1920s. Rather, it is set in the mythical kingdom of Pomme, which is French for apple, and it's the capital of the 7 animal kingdoms. And every year, each of the 7 animal kingdoms sends 2 of its best and brightest, always twins, to the capital to compete in the Harvest Tournament and hopefully bring honor and fame to their kingdom. So let's talk a minute about the mechanics. The game takes place on a hex-based map, very similar to Scythe. It'll look very familiar to players of that game, where players can move around and take various actions with the goal of being the first to earn 4 trophies, or 5 if you're playing with the expansion. Players can earn these trophies by achieving accomplishments like bringing jewels to the castle, apples to the castle, baking pies, collecting magic spells, and even being a good friend. Seriously, that's actually one of the goals, is being a good friend, and I love that about this game. Also, like Scythe, each turn a player chooses an action, keeping in mind the restriction that they can't take the same action 2 turns in a row. So the actions in this game include 1. Movement, which allows the player to move their animal friends around the board, fewer spaces if they're carrying items with them. Number 2, Seeking, which allows the player to place valuable gems, apples, and quests in various spots around the board to be discovered. And 3, Making, which allows a player to make pies, conjure spells, or implement upgrades. Now there's also a combat, and I'm saying this with air quotes, a combat mechanism just like Scythe, but in keeping with the family-friendly nature of the game, the combat here consists of food fights, which is pretty doggone cute. The players determine their food fight prowess by spending pies and using magic spells, which, incidentally, send more magic pies at their opponents during the fight. I love the food fighting aspect of this game. So that's the base game. The Pie in the Sky expansion adds a little bit more depth to the game. And for those who are familiar with Scythe and its expansions, the original game, this is a version of the Wind Gambit expansion for Scythe. And honestly, I never was a huge fan of the Wind Gambit in the original Scythe game. But in this version, it's a magic airship that can carry goods around the board, as well as some faction-specific powers that relate back to the airship. I enjoy this game, but since it's a family weight game, I wanted to give you a kid's eye view of it, which is pretty new for us. And so for the review segment, I actually played the game with my 10-year-old son, Nathan. He actually is turning 10 years old tomorrow on the night that we're doing our review. And he and I did our own little hot take on My Little Scythe and the Pie in the Sky expansion, which I will share with you now. So Nathan and I just played a game of My Little Scythe with the Pie in the Sky expansion. We'd played a few games before of just the base game because we wanted to prep ourselves and have a better understanding of the base game before we launched into whether or not we thought that the expansion was any good. So let's talk a little bit about the base game first. So Nate, what are some mechanisms that you like about this game?
So what I like about it is the trophies mechanism, where there's a lot of different ways you could win the game. It's just, I think that's really cool.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of different opportunities. Like, I think you and I did entirely different ways of trying to get to victory in this one. You really focused on the friendship track, and that got you your first trophy. Mm-hmm. I really didn't focus on the friendship track at all. And we'll get to that, how that ended. So I actually want to talk about that for a minute, the friendship track, because it's one of the mechanisms in this game that I like the most. In regular Scythe, there is, I forget what the name of it is, popularity track or something like that. It adds a score multiplier at the end of the game. In this one, there's no score multiplier, but the friendship track does give you the opportunity to get a trophy. And what I like about that is that it focuses on sort of the friendly aspect of the game. So there is combat to a degree with the pie fights, but the friendship track can be pretty important too. And in fact, there's a couple of different times during the game, primarily when you give a resource to another player, that you actually move up the friendship track so you can get a benefit for helping out one of your fellow players.
Yeah, it does encourage friendship, which I think is really good for a kid's game.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So what other mechanisms did you like?
So I really like the combat, because instead of like most games, you roll a die, see what number you get, and whatever number you get is like kind of like how many times you attack or something.
What did you think was different about My Little Scythe?
So I like that there's a lot of strategy and secrecy about the pie wheel mechanism.
I like pie chart.
Yeah, the pie wheel, and that you choose the number of pies, but you also have to, like, in some video games, actually, combat video games, you have to have a certain number of ammo, which is like this, because you have to have a certain number of pies to, I don't know, throw at each other.
Yeah.
Whatever,
Well, it's a food fight. You better be throwing it at each other. Yeah, no, I like that too. I think that's one of the cool things about this game, and Scythe, and any of the games that have that kind of card-based combat, that there's some strategy involved rather than just rolling some dice. So let's move on to production a little bit. I want to talk about production here because I think that this is probably the best production that I have ever seen in a family weight game. I've seen a lot of games where they have pretty minimal production values. The art is not very exciting. You might have some cardboard standees instead of something more, exciting. But this game has big, chunky minis that look really cool, and they're really cute. And all of the components in this are really nice. And that's kind of in keeping with Stonemaier games. Stonemaier is always kind of like that. But what did you think, Nate? What did you think about the production?
Well, I definitely agree. I do like the big, chunky, like you said, pieces. Like, it just really brings the game to life. And I think that, and also the art is really nice too.
Yeah, I think the art's cool.
I think the art's pretty good.
What do you think about playing a game like this that has that kind of more, well, I won't say interesting because that kind of suggests the answer already, but what do you think about playing a game like this that has those kind of more physical components as opposed to a game like Cascadia, which we played last night, which is more, bits of cardboard?
This really does add a slight toy factor to the game, which I really like, and I think it's good for a kid's game.
Yeah, I do too.
I think that's a good thing for
I think it's good for a grown-up's game.
Honestly, I agree with you. That's also one thing I'm excited about with Dark Tower, Return to Dark Tower, the game that you're getting.
Oh,
I like
the preview.
Yeah, I'm excited about those electronic components.
Me
That's
too.
Cool. That sounds really cool.
You've been listening to too much of the podcast. You've been hearing me talk about Return to Dark Tower too much.
And I also did see the preview thing that you watched, the video. That was pretty cool.
That was pretty cool.
Yeah.
So what was your favorite moment of the game?
Probably you really realizing I beat you. I think that was really funny.
Well, so tell everybody what happened.
He thought he'd won. He did some really, honestly, it was very smart how he did it. But then I used a personality card, which makes it a little easier. And he won. He got 5 trophies. But, I had one more turn to try to tie, which I did. And he wasn't thinking enough about being nice, aka he wasn't thinking about the friendship track. And that's the tiebreaker for the game. So I won, because I was at way more friendship than he had.
And isn't that something?
I gave him so much stuff, by the way. I gave him so many supplies.
You did. You gave me a ton of stuff.
And therefore, I still gotta be nice.
That's a good life lesson this game.
Nice,
be nice, and you'll win on the tiebreaker.
Yeah.
So let's switch over to the expansion, the Pie in the Sky expansion, because really that's what we're here to focus on today.
Yeah.
Because we played the base game before, and now we're talking about what's added to the game by bringing in Pie in the Sky. What did you think about the expansion compared to, say, the base game?
Well, I think the expansion, I just didn't like it as much because it just didn't add too many new features to the game.
I was actually thinking about that and wondering if your feelings might be because you didn't use it a lot.
Well, the thing is that's one of the things is I didn't really understand it, so I didn't really know how to use it that well.
Although I have to admit, your power with the airship I thought was a relatively difficult one to use, so I can understand that.
That was kind of lame power.
Yeah. Did you think it added too much complexity to the game, or did you think that it was, made it too complicated, or it didn't matter?
I don't think it made it that much more complicated. Actually, it did help me once really well, where I stole like one of the gems, and that's how I actually won.
That is true. So
That is-
actually,
yeah. So but the thing is, he
you
helped
owe-
me with that one.
you owe the expansion the win in this game, don't you?
Technically, I do, but still, it's not bad. For some people, I bet they would love it, and I think it would be a great thing to just look into.
Yeah. And at first, I kind of agreed with what you were saying. I was playing with the expansion pieces and the special airship powers, and my first thought was, I'm not sure this adds a lot to the game, because the powers don't actually seem to be that useful. And yours in particular, I thought was difficult. It let you replicate things under certain circumstances, but it was in challenging circumstances. But then my superpower was I had a harpoon that let me put down my harpoon in any spot, and then I could use the things in that spot to do a make action, even if I wasn't on that same spot. So it essentially act like a third character for me. At first, I had a really hard time making that work.
Yeah.
And then I had I thought it was a brilliant idea. And
Not really
I had this one spot where there was a stockpile of things, drop my harpoon token there, and I had a ton of stuff to use in my make actions.
You already had a lot of stuff, though.
I did.
I did give you a lot of stuff.
But I had even more. I had more options when I got to that spot, and it really paid off. I think I got 2 or 3 turns when I got to do some really big stuff, because I was able to draw off of the resources on a spot where I didn't actually have one of my characters, so they could be off doing other things. And so that ended up being really useful. So in the end, I actually found that I enjoyed it toward the end of the game when I knew how to use it better, instead of at the beginning. At the beginning, I felt a little bit more uninformed about it.
Yeah.
So,
I get it.
in terms of the base game, let's talk about replayability. Is this a game that you would ask for again, the base game?
Yes, I would, honestly. I really liked that game. It was very enjoyable to play. I think I would ask to play the base game again.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one. What about the expansion? Would you ask to play the Pie in the Sky expansion again?
That's something that I'm not so sure about. That was not my favorite expansion of the game. I did not particularly like it, but it's a life or death situation. I probably would play it again. Probably more than life or death. I mean, less than life or death.
So if you said, Dad, let's play My Little Scythe, and I said, okay, but only if we use the expansion, you'd still say yes.
Yeah, I probably would.
So lots of love from both of us on the base game. I also really enjoyed the expansion after I got to know it a little bit. Nathan, not as much on the expansion. He really enjoys the base game, loves to play that. Although I have to say, I feel like he would enjoy it a little bit more if he knew it better and had a couple more plays with it. Some of the abilities were a little tough to grok on first play, especially for a kid. Even I was playing the game going, well, I'm not really sure how I'm going to make good use of this particular power. And then at the end of the game, after we played it for a little while, I could absolutely see where that would be useful. And so I feel like if I gave him a couple more chances, he'd probably like that one too. But on first blush, loves the base game. Not quite as much of a fan of the Pie in the Sky expansion. I gave thumbs up to both.
Chris, I got a question for you. So when you first got this game several years ago, Nathan just wasn't that interested in playing games. You got it with the hope of kind of getting him into it and getting him to play games with you, but he wasn't playing it. Now he started to get into playing some hobby games with you. He seems to be more excited about it. And so you brought this back out. Does this now feel like he really, do you think this is a game that Nathan's going to be requesting, the base game of My Little Scythe?
Yeah, he actually has requested it. And I love that about this game. And honestly, Nathan's 10. And I feel like this game is definitely, it's the kind of thing that even maybe a 7 or an 8-year-old could handle at this point, because he doesn't like a ton of complexity in a game. So I feel like he's gotten a little bit older for this game. But at the same time, because he doesn't like the complexity, now this has kind of he's moved up to the point where this is in his comfort zone now. Very family-friendly game that gives just enough complexity to make this a real exciting experience for even any hobby board gamer who wants to play with their kid.
I got a chance to play this with I borrowed your copy and played this with my daughter several times, and she enjoyed it a lot. And I think for a family weight game, it is one of my favorite ones that I've had a chance to play. It still gave me the chance to feel like I was doing something, a little engine building, a little bit of, strategic choices. But almost every game ended up coming, to a tiebreaker or very close, like somebody won by 1 point. So she always had a chance at the game. She always had a shot at it. And as you mentioned, the friendship track, which is kind of fun, she wanted to give away her pies and, give stuff away to people to move up that friendship track. And I was just like, oh, good. Give me all that stuff. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to win so hard. But the game balances so well with that. It really is, it's a, especially
I'm glad I'm not your daughter, man. That's crazy.
Well, I love the fact that the tiebreaker in this game is the friendship track. And like Nathan said in his review of it, that was how he won the game. He was trying to be a good friend, and he played a good game. So I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, it not only gives you one of the bonuses, one of the trophies you can get, but it also is the tiebreaker. So it is very impactful, but it doesn't, as a strategic board gamer, it doesn't feel like a good direction to go because you're basically giving your opponents something. But the kids love doing that. So it was a really fun, thing that they baked in there. So yeah, cool.
Oh, let me add one other thing. If there's one big complaint I have about this game, the base game, it's that it's slightly too easy to get your trophies. Now, I'm not a big fan of house rules, but you could easily make a house rule here that, you'd have to do, like, say, three magic spells instead of 2, for example. You could easily change that. And that was one of the things that I liked about the Pie in the Sky expansion, was it did add an additional trophy and a little bit more complexity. So the first, I hate to say it, but the first time that Nathan and I played this game together, he kicked my butt. It was like in 20 minutes. And I'm like, this game's not supposed to go that fast, but he did. So I think that this game, the Pie in the Sky expansion, added the level of complexity I think it needed to make it just a little bit more meaty.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting balance because I agree that the game probably needed just a little bit more meat to be more entertaining for me and for a hobby gamer. But adding a little more complexity probably is going to push it right outside of the realm of a 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old that's going to enjoy it for most kids. So that's an interesting trade-off there. Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think my daughter would enjoy adding extra complexity to this game, but I definitely would. So it's an interesting spot to be in. All right, cool. Well, let's jump into some games that we're looking into the future. We're going to pull out our crystal balls and give some future takes here. Adam, what do you got? What have you been looking at?
Yeah, so a game that I'd like to take a future test drive in or breakdown or whatever we end up doing is called Brian Boru, High King of Ireland. This game is designed by Pierre Sylvester and published by Osprey Games. Pierre Sylvester did some notable games, Vercindos Volk and The King is Dead, all first edition and second edition. So that's what he's kind of most known for. And this game, it looks super interesting. It's a trick-taking game at heart, where if you win the trick, you get to do cool stuff, but if you lose the trick, you still get to do cool stuff. Kind of similar to Shamans a little. There's no hidden trade or nothing like that, but you get you get to do something even if you lose the trick. I saw this game from Shut Up and Sit Down. They did a nice preview of it, and it looked just interesting to me. It's an area control trick taker. I said trick taker like 5 times. Sorry, Chris. But Brian Boru is a real dude, and he did stuff in Ireland back in the day. He had to kind of gain favor with the church, fight off some Vikings, and then he would arrange marriages. So Tim, it's got something for you too. I know that's a big part of all your favorite games. And anyway, just it looks super interesting. Lots of mechanisms that I haven't seen before, kind of quirky, different than anything else that I know about there. A game I'm looking forward to playing. Brian Boru, High King of Ireland. Have you guys looked at this or heard of it or have any interest in playing it?
I had never heard of it, and I cannot believe how much I really want to play this game.
It looks amazing.
I'm looking at the production on it, and it just looks like pretty simple and clever, but you're telling me that the turns are played on trick taking, but it's like an area control. It looks like there might be some engine building going on or some like mech, it just looks, I don't know who I would ever play this with, but I want to play. We should play it. This is a game for us to play. We got to get this one played for sure.
So yeah, you kind of start by picking which area you want to vie for, and you put this little circle around it, and then you throw out the card that's going to help you win control of that circle. And then, well, if you don't win it, you still get to do whatever like bonus stuff associated with that suit. And if you do win it, then you get to like get some bonuses in that region, try to gain control of that area. It just looks super fascinating and unique to anything else I've seen out there.
Chris, what about you? You now enjoyed a trick-taking game. You actually purchased one this week. Does this sound interesting to you?
And I love me a trick-taking game, by which I mean I really hate trick-taking games. But you're right. No, I all joking aside, I experienced Shamans, and I really enjoyed that game. It's still, I have sort of this visceral reaction to trick-taking games that I'm like, I don't want to play that. But, I'd play it. I'd give it a shot because, you guys have expanded my horizons on several areas, including trick-taking games. So maybe it'd be a lot of fun.
I feel like we're closing your horizons on area control games, great ones that we played tonight, for instance.
Yeah.
It's weird.
Well, trick-taking game, pre-industrial Europe. I mean, what's not to love?
That's right up your alley.
All right. I have one other game, or actually a collection of games I'll talk about. And this kind of ties into my On the Table segment. And that is just yesterday, Shem Phillips and Garphill Games announced their next trilogy that's going to be in the East, West, North, South anthology. And that is the South Tigris games. So they did kind of a unique thing. They announced all three of the games that are going to come out in this next trilogy. The first one's going to be Wayfarers of the South Tigris. The second one's Scholars of the South Tigris, and the third one is Inventors of the South Tigris. The first one is expected to release in like Q1 or Q2 of 2022, so they've already got it pretty well designed. They're just kind of wrapping it up at this point, but they already have a good idea of what Scholars is going to be, and then they're just still doing play testing and working through some iterations of Inventors, which is going to be the third in the trilogy. So yeah, I'm pretty excited. Just the news broke yesterday. There's a 90-minute or 50-minute video presentation you can find from Shem Phillips and his co-designer Sam McDonald. I think Sam McDonald started co-designing with him with Architects. I think that was actually his design that Garphill kind of took in and worked through with them. So Shem Phillips was designing games on his own. Now Sam McDonald pretty much co-designs all of the games that they work on together. So he's had a big part in the West Kingdom trilogy, and it sounds like he's a big part of the South Tigris trilogy. The one thing that really stands out here is that they picked a specific mechanism that they wanted to iterate through in this, and that is dice placement. So instead of just doing some kind of worker placement or card tableau building like they've done in their last several games, this one is going to focus on different mechanisms and unique mechanisms that work with like dice worker placement. So pretty exciting to me, especially for where I am right now with Garphill. I'm looking forward to seeing what comes out of these, and if they look unique enough to add to the collection, or at least give it a try with. I've never heard you guys ever ask. We've been playing games together for a couple of years now. None of you guys have ever really even asked or shown interest in the Garphill games. Have they not been on your radar? Are they something that turns you off about them?
I've seen them. I just haven't had high interest in playing them. I've heard good things about a bunch of them, but I think I don't know where to start. If there's like Architects and Viscounts and Paladins of the West Kingdom, I'm like, well, those are probably all the same, and I don't know where to start with those. And same with the North Sea. There's 3 of them. Like, which one am I supposed to start with? I could do research there, but it seems like a marketing trick or something that I guess I get pulled in by anything with the name Dune on it. So I'm susceptible, but I don't know why I haven't played any. I would love to try one out and see what they're all about. And but that's where I'm at.
Chris, have they ever been on your radar, or they just don't seem interesting? Well, you played Raiders with me probably before you ever heard about any of the other games.
Yeah, I mean, I played Raiders with you, didn't really enjoy it. I mean, nothing about them really catches my attention,
okay.
Which doesn't mean I wouldn't like them. Maybe I'd try them and I'd like them, but there's nothing about them that markets to me.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. I mean, they're all very much, leaning in on the Euro, the resource management collections. But I do personally really like the mechanisms and production and the look and feel of them. And I'm really pleasantly surprised with the last couple with Hadrian's Walls and Paladins now that I've played that, I think they do a lot of standard things in really good ways. So I don't know that you would like these anymore, but it's got me more excited, and I might have to force you guys to try 1 or 2 with me in the near future.
Cool.
All right, cool. Well, I think that will wrap up our episode of formerly known as Board Game Hot Takes, soon to be known as something else. We'll see. If you would like to chat with us, though, you can still find us as Board Game Hot Takes, and probably some reference to it in the near future. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I'm most active on Twitter, so you want to chat with us, leave comments, tell us what we got right, what we got wrong. that's where you're probably going to get the quickest response. But we love to hear from you on any platform. And if you have a few minutes, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We appreciate it. It lets us know that people are listening to the show. Until next week, take care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.